Welcome everyone to the Mentoring Lounge, where we're learning about mentor practices. Today, it's about communication, one of the foundational elements of mentor practices. If there's anything that you touch every time you're in a mentoring arrangement, mentoring relationship, you're touching communication somehow. And we thought we would bring a little bit of attention to that topic today. And Doug and I got together and says, well, what should we cover? And we decided that there is the base definition of communication, and then what we'll call four tips, tools, technologies. Oh, sorry, maybe techniques would be a better word that we would just play with today. So, welcome to this. This is the International Mentoring Community Mentoring Lounge, and I'm Stephen Hobbs. Doug Lawrence is with me. And I'm just going to have Doug introduce himself. I'll do a quick introduction myself, and then I'll just go over the agenda for today's video. So again, it's about communication. Let's call it all things communication because it's going to cover quite a wide gambit of insights for you. Doug?
And it actually just fits in quite nicely with all things mentoring.
For sure.
So I'm Doug Lawrence. I'm one of the co-founders of the International Mentoring Community, and I am the director of practice as part of the two of us that are doing the international mentoring community. So we look forward to those of you that have taken the time to come in and join us today.
For sure. And Stephen Hobbs, again, I am the director primarily of the certification recertification. If you're looking to be certified as a mentor, we have that system available to you. And then I lean over into the education component as well, where I enjoy bringing ideas, insights, interpretations, investigations forward. Just to really put things in perspective, Doug has a strong practice. He does a lot of mentoring. I don't do quite as much as I used to. And so between the two of us, I think we can bring a lot of really great ideas forward for you. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to go over this basic content today. We have the notion of what is mentoring, because we just want to touch base with that, about mentoring relationships, and then look at a definition of effective communication, sort of to provide that foundation, and then go into those four tips, tools, techniques. One's called conscious, often called active listening, and look at the importance of ask questions. Four essential tools, quick little hits, just as reminders, and then do some storytelling, story sharing. What's the importance of each of those to what it is that we do? And to start this off, I think what would be important is to just give us a sense of what is mentoring. So I've asked Doug to start us off. We're not necessarily diving into a formal definition of mentoring. We would just like to offer how we see it unfolding and what are some of the words we associate with it. Doug, you want to get us started?
Yeah, I certainly can. So mentoring involves two people, a mentor and a mentee, and they interact with each other. And a lot of that is the mentor sharing their lived experience that they have with the mentee, and conversely, the mentee sharing, what they've got for experience as well, in addition to a deeper, richer understanding of what they hope to take away from the mentoring process. Some of the other things that, it is a two-way relationship, and it's premised on trust. And that's, so we typically talk about a two-way trusted relationship. And it's a relationship where it's not one way, but it's two way, as I mentioned. But it's premised on the concept or the idea that we're both going to learn and grow on a personal and professional basis. And the reason why that's important is that for a large part of the time people thought of mentoring as solely focused on professional development, career development, and that. And it goes now with the advent of mental health and that the idea of how mentoring plays a part goes way beyond the traditional model.
So with that two-way, another word I would use is reciprocal. So sometimes we talk about holistic reciprocal mentoring is what we're about. And the holistic is there is because it's to remind us that all things are interconnected somehow. You can find the threads that go into the strings that become the cords that become the ropes. And with mentoring, yes, mentor mentee, but there's also a ripple effect of what takes place because of what the mentor and mentee chat about. Because when the mentee goes out and is in practice themselves, there's a ripple effect because of the mentor sharing and answering the questions. They're going, oh, that's something I should do over here, or I could do over here. So there's this ripple effect that takes place as well, which is why it brings up this the idea of the mentoring relationship. And if we think about it, mentoring relationship, mentoring connection, there's something that's actually happening there between the mentor and the mentee. And Doug, in your words, what is that about?
For me, the connection is extremely important, and it needs to be the two-way, sort of the two-way relationship. But being connected also involves being present in the moment and being able to listen and hear what your mentee or your protege, whatever term you wish to use, what they're saying, because there's so much that we miss in our ability to be able to communicate. There's a lot of things that we miss that are important to the mentee that we as mentors need to be tuned in to what it is that they're looking for.
Yeah. And it's really important to remember there is the notion of the arrangement, the mentoring arrangement, the how, the system. The mentoring relationship connection is about the persons. We have to remember if we're mentors and when we mentor, the person across from us is a person. There's often I hear people go, oh yeah, then I did this and did this. And you sort of, when you're listening to it, you're feeling as though that person's just sort of like a mannequin sitting over there and you're just doing your thing as a mentor, when in actual fact, there's that person wondering what the heck's going on. And I think of that from a splaining point of view, as sometimes mentors get into putting a lot out when it's not quite how we would want to do it, which is why I'm going to segue into what is communication, because if this is the foundational element and we want to have this two-way trusted reciprocal relationship that's housed in some form of structure that works for both, then communication being that foundational element, what is it? How does it work? So let me give you a couple of ways of looking at communication. Then I'm just going to ask Doug. He always has these really great practice ideas, comes from his years of doing what he does. But I'll give you a little bit more of the concept theoretical side of things at the moment. So the first thing I would mention is, of three, the first is that communication is a system, a process of sending and receiving messages. And therefore, there are corridors that it's working, and there's blocks when it's not. And being able to reflect in and on that while you're there, and how do I get to the corridors and thus get rid of the blocks? Or if I feel like it's going to block off, what can I do? That's communication. But the second way of looking at communication is actually the message itself. We don't tend to use it that way as much, but we used to talk about, well, we're going to send this communication, which could have been like a letter or a report. In today's world, we don't use communication in that way. The third way is it's kind of an interesting one that leans into the relationship aspect from an arrangement requirement. And mentoring, all right, using communication and the mentee interacting with the mentor, think of it this way. Communication is about the coordination of the other person's behavior. Okay. So if you're sharing and you're sharing in this sort of two-way, open, collaborative way of communicating with one another, you feel it. You understand that, and you can get a good sense that it's working, and therefore, in a sense, you lean in. If you are, and I have done this, I'll claim it. I've done a little bit of splaining in my life, and I'm very aware of it now. I didn't do it intentionally, but it was there. But the idea is if you feel as though you're being talked at and not being collaborative, you can almost feel yourself pulling back. So this notion of the coordinating of behavior. So the system of sending messages, the blocks and the corridors, the sense of the message itself, and coordinating the behaviors of others. So that's a little bit of the foundational conceptual component. But Doug, you got a great example of something from a communication point of view that you want to share with everyone?
Well, I just happened to think of, I had a time where I was working with a young person as part of a mentorship program that I'd been involved in helping get set up in that. And we were sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum because of my my expectations of his part in the mentorship program. And obviously, he in return would have expectations as well. And the two didn't cross. And we actually uh, ended up parting ways. And I did some checking and found out that his struggle or difficulty with communicating in general was what drove him to move away from any sort of relationship whatsoever, because for a number of different reasons, cultural, safety, all those things. And so I made two or three attempts at trying to close that gap and was unsuccessful. And so at that stage, that's when I had the chat with the program manager and said, I'm not sure that this person could learn or could develop the way we are, what our expectations are in the mentoring process, and you may have to explore some other modality.
Would you say that there is a big difference in the verbal, nonverbal body language aspect of that mentoring connection? Did that play in at all?
Now that as I reflect back and think, definitely the body language, because the signs were there. It was a lack of communication. So where we both failed was that we didn't very clearly articulate our expectations of the relationship. So what is it that you hope to take away from our time that we are spending together? And I think that's a question that needs to be asked more often, and that's a question that needs an answer so that the mentoring relationship becomes a fruitful journey for both parties.
So would you say, based on that experience and others that you've had, that being really attentive to the communication system, the messages that are going back and forth, how they're framed, is there a sense of some coordination is really important to the mentor? Don't leave that to later, but really pay attention to it at the beginning?
There is, and actually, as we've been talking, I was just thinking of another situation that took place yesterday with a person that I was working with, and there were these uncomfortable pauses where there was no dialogue going back and forth. And I've had that in a couple other situations as well. And you try to fill the void with as much storytelling and stuff like that as you possibly can. But sometimes it's just best that you just kind of zip your lip and just sit there and let the conversation evolve if it is in fact going to evolve.
So there's quite a few interesting things happening even at the very beginning that if you pay attention to can make a big difference in
Yeah,
the mentoring going forward, right?
correct.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that leans into the next one, which is this conscious active listening. Now, active listening is usually the term that you find if you're looking through most books or training materials, things like that. But Doug and I said, well, what would happen if we put conscious bracket active listening so that what we're doing is we're really saying, okay, hang on, you as a mentor consciously being active while you're listening, and can you encourage the mentee to give that back to you? That's where we were coming from. And we said, okay, well, that's great. But one of the keys here is that you got to always make sure that you're hearing what that mentee is sharing with you. So just before I share 7 ideas about conscious active listening, Doug has a really important point to make around this notion of listening and hearing. And Doug, you want to share that?
I probably have a couple, but the one that jumps out that I actually just it came to me the last couple of days was, especially when it comes to active listening and speaking at the same time, but people who speak to hear themselves speak have no substance or relatability to the conversation. And I'm sure that every single one of our listeners today can probably think of that person that just wouldn't be quiet, that always was talking, and and wasn't listening to, number one, what was my needs, what are my needs in this relationship, and number two, if there was a good idea, did it get overshadowed by a conversation that had no substance or relatability to what we were talking about.
Remember I mentioned about the splaining part. That was for me is I wasn't hearing anything, but I was certainly putting it out. And I just went, I think I did that twice. I almost started a third time and I went, I was a lot quieter and shifted gears. It usually doesn't take me 3 times to learn something. And so I get what you're sharing. But these 7 elements that I want to give to you about listening, we actually shot a video about this, which is on Mentor Practices. So you can go in and get more depth with it. But the idea here is that you are attending to the sound, which means you can understand what that sound means. So you're actually hearing it and attuning to what the words are and what they might mean to you so that you can comprehend and go, oh, okay, this is where we are. All right, this is the A, this is the B, this is the C. We get a sense of that. That gets you into reflecting in and on what's taking place so that you can go, all right, I'll go this direction, I'll go that direction, so that you can store it away in a sense and remember what it is that you're hearing, because sometimes you may get a couple of pieces of insight and you go, well, I'll work with this one, but I got to remember this one. Hang on, I'm going to come back to that one and help to bring that forward. And then it's the actual responding that's taking place so that you are being responsible to share the response, right? That, remember that notion of sending, receiving messages, corridors and blocks. And the 7th element of this is the idea of observing this the whole time. There's a reflection in while you're doing it, and then there's reflection on it while it's taking place. So I brought those 7 up so that you might just go, oh, okay, so which one of those could I improve upon? Which ones are ones I do really well? and just sort of see what you can do with that. So those are the 7 elements, steps, whatever way that you want to take a look at that. Just before we move on to asking questions, Doug, is there anything you want to add on the idea of conscious active listening here?
No, I think we've covered it quite nicely.
Okay, well then, the importance of asking questions, and I would say asking the specific questions. Sometimes people go, well, I'll just ask a question. No. In the mentoring is, can you get to the asking the specific questions? I'm not saying you're not going to ask general questions, but the person's there to interact with you. So asking specific questions, but more important is to get the mentee to learn how to ask you specific questions. I'm just going to let Doug take it from there, because this is one of the topics that he enjoys having a conversation about. And so, Doug, I'll turn it over to you. What do you got to share here?
Well, for me, it's become a way of life, to be truthfully honest, is that the act or the ability to ask questions, which is part of the Socratic method, is it's a technique that you can use, and it is used outside of the mentoring space, even as we speak today. But it can be utilized in a number of different places to help guide people to find the answer that they're searching for, more or less on their own volition. And so it's a simple matter. And I know when I speak to people about the Socratic method, I basically allude to the fact that you have a series of questions that you ask that's going to guide. And sometimes those questions that you've put forward to provide as guidance will generate some additional questions, which then need to have some subsequent follow-up done as well. And it can be as simple as, especially if you're working, say, doing leadership mentoring or whatever, and you're having a conversation with one of the leaders in the organization who says, I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I keep running into a brick wall. And you can turn around and very simply say that, what would happen if you were to do A, B, C, or D? So what you've done is you've given them 4 different answers to the question without telling them what the answer is. And you've given them the opportunity to search based on those 4, to search as to which one is one that's going to best serve that particular situation.
Yeah. And that's why knowing the general versus specific kind of questions to ask, open and close, these are kind of tools inside this topic. And we're thinking about actually running a workshop on how to use the Socratic method, how to create questions, and what do you do with those questions, and how do you bring them forward. We're thinking about doing a weekend workshop on that. So in the comments section, drop a note if that would be of interest to you. And we might do something similar with the conscious active listening. So again, if you want to put comments into the comments section, that would be great. Doug, I'm just checking, I'm looking around, see we don't have any questions coming in off the live stream. So I think what we'll do is we'll keep going. And to be able to bring this forward, I just want to acknowledge where we are in our agenda. We're at number 6. We have gone through the first 5. And also to let you know, we will be putting up some base notes in the description section with the video. And then we're going to take all of our notes that we use and a little bit more, and it's going to go up on a blog, and we'll be putting the blog link in the description as well. And that usually goes in down below on the video here. So let's take a look at these 4 essential tools that we want to go over. And the first one that we're going to bring to the foreground is this notion of pausing and slowing down before responding. I call this the credibility pause. um, Again, along the way, I've learned sometimes we jump into a response and we may not have actually heard the last little bit of what the mentee is saying. And sometimes that can be very important. I mean, and I don't use the word very often, but very important to us as mentors, and to have that credibility pause and just make sure that the response you're going to give makes sense for what's taking place. So I use respond rather than react. So that's one of the tools we wanted to give to you, is that slow down and actually pause. And if you need to sort of just look away as though, and I'm going to do an example here, look away, and you're just sort of think as though you're thinking of response, most people will get, oh, okay, that's a bit of a pause because I need to think a little. And I do that anyway, is because I'm a visual learner. So I go looking at my whiteboards that I have hanging in the air, looking for responses. But the second one we want to look at was trigger words. And Doug, you want to bring that one up?
Every conversation that you have with somebody has trigger words in the within the context of the conversation. And as an example, somebody who can say, well, I can't do that. That may very well be that's a trigger word for me to say, here's an individual who is struggling with self-esteem, self-confidence. And then I can formulate our plan of attack, or together we can formulate our plan of attack on how we're going to deal with that particular situation or issue.
Someone just asked, actually, aren't there trigger words that a mentor might use with a mentee that might set things into a bit of a spiral or a spin out? What do you think?
Ironically, I had that today where I actually had to ask the question, is what we're talking about somewhat overwhelming? Because I'm getting a sense from your body language that, you seem to be shifting a bit behavioral wise from when we first started. So there's obviously something that I'm concerned about your well-being. So let's stop having the conversation we're having and let's explore what's going to work better for you. And we went through that process. But yes, most definitely.
So sometimes we pick it up because it might happen. But is there any way of knowing what the trigger words might be for the mentee? How might we suss that out? Because Jacqueline just did a little follow-up here. How do I know how to not do it? So, any thoughts on that?
Part of that actually takes us back to the pausing statement. And one of the techniques that I use is I'm getting ready to respond to something my mentee, such as the one with Jacqueline, did you say?
Yeah, it was, Jacqueline. Yep.
That Jacqueline had brought forward. So for me, what it means is that I pause and I ask myself, how would I feel or how would I respond to this particular situation without it turning into a conversation that has all kinds of negativity surrounding it and that. And so I'm pausing and I'm sort of taking that very quick 10-second thing as I go quickly through. Am I okay with how this is going to be said? Do I fully understand, comprehend the impact that this is going to have, and what are the outcomes, and deal with it that way? So that's how I would take a look at it.
Okay. Well, hopefully that helps out, Jacqueline, that everything is okay with those responses. You got a little bit more. Oh, there she just said yes. Okay. Looks like we're all right with that one. Okay. That might be another one to take a look at some point in time. Yeah, maybe we'll do maybe even a deeper workshop on that one at some point in time. So we'll see how that goes. Okay. All right. So the notion of deflection. I'm going to pick up on this one. I had an opportunity to really pay attention to this because someone that I was interacting with, I could feel the tension building, and I went, hang on a minute, I've got to deflect this away because the topic, it was sort of, we were clashing a little bit on our perspectives and our shared point of view. And I need to just slow it down a little bit, like that slow down aspect, and figure out what is it that's in there that might be triggering the interaction we're having, so that I could just sort of, instead of sort of niggling at each other, how can we just pull it apart a little bit from a deflection point of view? So I learned from that sometimes you do have to, how do I get off on a side track, off the main track, and get off to a side, and then just sort of figure out through some little bit easier conversations, kinder, wiser conversations, what might be actually happening in our the word choice, or is it the concept choice? Is it something else that that person's bringing in, or maybe I'm bringing in as the mentor? In my case, the person had gone through a really bad meeting in the morning, and sort of was sort of carrying it into the mentoring session, and sort of was almost going to almost want to yell, I guess, and wasn't necessarily at me. And we figured this out. And I just went, I'm glad I just sort of took it off onto the side rail there, and sort of slowed it down. And we found common ground, and actually got a couple of deep breaths in there. And it sort of took away all of what was happening. So that was a good learning for me, is sometimes you don't have to stay in it. Sometimes you can just go off to the side and then come back around to it. Do you want to add anything there before you go over crucial conversations, Doug?
No, I think you covered it. Yeah.
Well, then go for crucial conversations. What's that one all about?
So crucial conversations is when you are in the midst of a conversation, and for lack of a better choice of words, it's gone south on you, and there's anger, there's emotions are at an all-time high. And what you need to be able to do is to step out of that conversation and give it, and typically the best exit is one where you would say, I'm getting a sense that our emotions are quite high, and that we're having a difficult time and notice the emphasis on the word that we are having a difficult time in dealing with this. Let's take a pause. Let's take a recess, whatever term you want to use, to just calm down, and then let's come back in a couple hours and let's continue the conversation at that time point. And if you can do that, it ends up that you don't lose all those great ideas because you've been able to keep them. But what's happened now is that people have a more reasonable approach to deal with the situation, and are able to bring forward additional ideas that they can use to help resolve the issue that you originally started with.
Yeah, so it's very much about finding common ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting, because if you go back to communication, communication has community inside it. Community is the level of commonness that unifies us, and therefore communication is about what's the level of commonness that unifies us into action. So finding the common ground, crucial conversations sometimes helps us find that, and that might take empathy. It may bring out the EQ, the emotional intelligence of both of you, to be able to get in there and figure out what's going on. So I add that as well to the mix. And I think what we'll do is let's go into the storytelling, story sharing. And I'm just going to start off with the following. From a storytelling point of view, that's you're managing the storytelling for the persons. Story sharing is you are leading the person from the story. So with managing stories for the persons, managing, leading the person from the story is another way of looking at it. And you might go, so what? Like, come on, you're sort of splitting hairs here or something. True, but often what happens is with storytelling, you can slip into almost selling. I'm going to tell you this story because I want to sell you on this idea so that you do this. And I'm not saying it happens with everyone, okay? Those who understand the art and science of storytelling. But when I was looking at it, I was thinking, well, hang on, would sharing then be about caring? And I thought that's a different way. So if I'm leading the person from a sharing, caring perspective, when I'm going into mentoring, then I would be leading. But sometimes I have to go in mentoring thinking about the telling, selling aspect, and I might use a bit of storytelling. Now, yes, it's a fine hair to split, but it helped me. Now, this again, I'm coming at it from my own practice, is that it helped me to understand the way in which I was meeting and greeting and interacting with that person. Because I know that when the mentee caught on to the notion of, oh, okay, so this is me doing storytelling, this is me doing story sharing, then I know that our sense, our depth, our richness of our relationship and the arrangement that we've set up just seems to flow. And that was always a benefit for me and benefit for the mentee. But Doug isn't, again, this is probably one of those workshops we might do as well, is because Doug uses a lot of storytelling, story sharing. So do you want to add your own take on this, Doug?
Once again, it's kind of ironic, but I spent this morning probably an hour and 15 minutes or thereabouts going over the whole concept of storytelling and trying to the
Was
individual
this
that
was this in a mentoring session today?
yeah
Oh, okay, all right.
yeah we the individual had asked for some help because as part of them wanting to get prepared to become a mentor, they understood that storytelling was a valuable tool to have in your toolbox, and they wanted some more information and a deeper, richer understanding of the process. And so we spent that hour and 15 or hour and 20 going through and talking about the ability of the art to be able to transition from one spot in the story to another spot and to do it in a effortless and seamless way. And so we went through a number of different things and sort of we were able to have a better understanding of what the potential outcomes could be by using this technique.
Yeah. It's such a profound, encouraging way to interact with the mentee. Um, Earlier in my attempts at mentoring, and I'll use attempts at mentoring because I was probably coaching or instructing more than I was mentoring at the time. And that might, again, be another great workshop. We'll have to see how this all unfolds. But the really understanding the importance of story, whether it's telling or sharing, and again, that fine line of the fine hair there, but it really is important, right? It really is profound. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we are going to do is just acknowledge that today we wanted to just talk a little bit about mentoring, about the mentoring relationship and these the notion of communication and these ideas, these concepts and practices connected with it. So it's a bit of a potpourri. I get that, but yet we've heard people out there talk about these in other articles. Some people have asked us questions, so we brought these ones together. Again, thank you, Jacqueline, for your question as well. So it sort of gets us to a point of closing here. But to be able to acknowledge, I'm going to ask you to comment on the video, because we love to learn from you. And by commenting, you give us more insights. And you can offer edits. What would you add, alter, delete? We're open to that because we're improving our practice all the time. That's why we call it Mentor Practices, is the name of the YouTube channel. And also, if we can be of assistance to you, you can drop a message in down below. That would be public facing, and we'll certainly respond. You can always go to wealthmovement.com, WELLTH movement.com, and contact /contact, and that's a private facing message, and that's where I hang out. Doug is at talentc.ca, and that's talent with the capital letter C.ca. If you wanted to have a chat with him, he would be open to opening up a conversation with you as well. So with that, I just want to remind you, if certification is something that's important to you, we offer the Certificate of Practice Journey Mentor through the International Mentoring Committee, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you about that. Again, that might be one of the questions you ask down below, and we'll take it. One of the upcoming videos, we're just going to go over the 5 pillars of the certification process, using the profile, self-assessment, the education, the verification, and the certification that goes with that, and just open that up for you so that you can hear it. And I think that pretty well covers it for me. So I think, Doug, we're getting to a point where we'll head toward closing. And what we do here in the Mentoring Lounge is I usually bring everyone in. And thank you if you're still here listening to us. That's great. So going out, I asked Doug to share some important nugget that he picked up or wants to emphasize a point. When I know he's done, I'll just say take care, and we'll close off this live stream. And so I'll wish you the best at this point in time. So Doug, your parting thought is?
I encourage our listeners to utilize the Socratic method, so the asking of questions to guide your mentee on the journey that they need to go on to get the answer. I encourage you to use that as much as you possibly can.